This is the Ielts listening test. You will hear a number of different recordings and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1. Part 4.
You'll hear part of a lecture given by a waste recycle management's professor. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer the questions 31 to 40.
Hi everyone. This morning I'm going to talk to you about flea markets in England. At first we were surprised to learn that only 15% of people here in England make an effort to collect waste. That is lower than other European countries. Also, it might be falling within a couple of years' time unless the government makes a severe regulation for industries and local residences. The UK government's target means that by 2012 we must decrease our waste emissions by 45% compared with 2000. Local councils can offer support to meet that target by taking part in the National Green Campaign and investing in local flea markets. Most of all, these markets reduce waste emissions from landfill sites. A flea market, or swap meet, is a type of bazaar where very cheap or second-hand goods are sold or bartered for. It may be indoors, like in a warehouse or school gymnasium, or it may be outdoors, like in a field or under a tent. The flea market vendors display the goods used on the table for selling, such as a few unwanted household items to operate commerce, including a variety of used living products. Many flea markets in European countries have food vendors who sell snacks and drinks to the visitors, and may be part of a small event such as carnivals or concerts. As part of our research, our team carried out a questionnaire with people in the local area. The results said, we need to open more second-hand shops. However, one problem is that there is a lack of information and marketing. To solve the problems, local councils should invest and support in flea markets by doing things like creating parking space, organising security, public promotions using the internet and other resources. We were also surprised to discover how waste such as furniture, computers, kitchen tools, and other such things are reused. And wooden furniture or electronic products are easy to recycle because they can be reused over and over again without becoming weaker. Around 3 million electronic goods are thrown away per year. Also, around 500,000 pieces of furniture are also disposed of. Only 1/5 is collected and fortunately recycled through many local flea markets. In 2009, there were around 3,000 flea markets in England. The number is increasing steadily so far. Surprisingly, by collecting under 15% of old books, lots of paper is imported, so more paper can be recycled in the UK. Europe recycles 50% of its paper, and Germany recycles 80% of its paper. When recycling launched, there were quality problems, so it was so hard to reuse paper in office sheets. However, these problems have now been solved, and Union of the Flea Markets based in East London produces high-quality recycled paper. Another union, Loving Paper, currently sells the paper that has been through a sorting process to farmers or gardeners as fertilizer. So, to sum up, there seems to be a number of activities that enable people to reuse waste, but the substantial problem is encouraging people to think twice about taking their waste to a flea market instead of throwing it away. I think the recycling program will make us save materials and protect the environment in future. And next, I'll show the plan for
That is the
promoting
end
it.
of part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to part 4. That is the end of the listening test. In the Ielts test, you would now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Part 4.
You will hear a talk by a meteorologist about weather forecasting. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
I work for the National Weather Service, and as part of your course on weather patterns, I've been asked to talk to you about how we predict the weather. We're so used to switching on our TVs and getting an up-to-date weather forecast at any time of day or night that we probably forget that this level of sophistication has only been achieved in the last few decades, and weather forecasting is actually an ancient art. So I want to start by looking back into history. The earliest weather forecasts appeared in the 1500s in almanacs, which were lists of information produced every year. Their predictions relied heavily on making links between the weather and where the planets were in the sky on certain days. In addition, predictions were often based on information, like if the fourth night after a new moon was clear, good weather was expected to follow. But once basic weather instruments were invented, things slowly started to change. In the mid-15th century, a man called Nicholas Cusa, a German mathematician, designed a hygrometer which told people how much humidity there was in the air. To do this, Cusa put some sheep's wool on a set of scales and then monitored the change in the wool's weight according to the air conditions. A piece of equipment we all know and use is the thermometer. Changes in temperature couldn't really be measured until the Italian Galileo Galilei invented his thermometer in 1593. It wasn't like a modern-day thermometer because it had water inside it instead of mercury. In fact, it wasn't until 1714 that Gabriel Fahrenheit invented the first mercury thermometer. In 1643, another Italian, called Evangelista Torricelli, invented the first barometer, which measured atmospheric pressure. This was another big step forward in more accurate weather predicting. As time went on, during the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, all these meteorological instruments were improved and developed, and people in different countries began to record measurements relating to their local weather. However, in those days it was very difficult to send records from one part of the world to another, so it wasn't possible for them to share their information until the electric telegraph became more widespread. This meant that weather observations could be sent on a regular basis to and from different countries. By the 1860s, therefore, weather forecasts were becoming more common and accurate because they were based on observations taken at the same time over a wide area. In 1863, France started publishing weather maps each day. This hadn't been done before, and other nations soon followed. So that was the start of national weather forecasting. And I'll now tell you how we at the National Weather Centre get the information we need to produce a forecast. Even today, one of the most important methods we use is observations, which tell us what the weather is doing right now. Observation reports are sent automatically from equipment at a number of weather stations in different parts of the country. They are nearly all based at airports, although a few are in urban centres. The equipment senses temperature, humidity, pressure, and wind speed direction. Meteorologists also rely really heavily on satellites, which send images to our computer screens. What we see on our screens is bright colours. Orange represents dry air, and bright blue shows moisture levels in the atmosphere. The satellites are located 22,000 miles above the surface of the Earth, and it's amazing that despite that distance, it's possible for us to make out an individual cloud and follow it as it moves across the landscape. In addition to collecting data from the ground, we need to know what's happening in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So a couple of times a day, from many sites across the country, we send radio sondes into the air. A radio sonde is a box containing a package of equipment, and it hangs from a balloon which is filled with gas. Data is transmitted back to the weather station. Finally, radar. This was first used over 150 years ago and still is. New advances are being made all the time, and it is one method for detecting and monitoring the progress of hurricanes. Crucial information is shown by different colours representing speed and direction. Radar is also used by aircraft, of course. All this information from different sources is put into computer models, which are like massive computer programs. Sometimes they all give us the same story, and sometimes we have to use our own experience to decide which is showing the most accurate forecast, which we then pass on to you. So, I hope next time you watch the weather forecast, you'll think about how we meteorologists spend our time. And maybe I've persuaded some of you to study meteorology in more depth.
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 4. That is the end of the listening test. Part 4.
You will hear a professor give a lecture on Louisa May Alcott. First, you have some time to look at the questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and complete the timeline in questions 31 to 40.
Good afternoon. Today I'd like to continue our discussion of the lives of prominent American writers by talking about Louisa May Alcott, one of the best-known 19th century writers. Alcott is known for her moralistic girls' novels, but she was a much more serious individual than those novels might lead one to believe. She was born in 1832, the daughter of Bronson Alcott, who was one of the founders of the Transcendentalist movement. Bronson Alcott was a philosopher, but not a provider, and the family lived close to poverty. From an early age, Louisa was determined to find a way to improve her family's economic situation. As a teenager, she worked to support her family by taking on a variety of low-paying jobs, including teacher, seamstress, and household servant. Alcott also started writing when she was young. She wrote her first novel when she was just 17 years old, although it wasn't published until many years after her death. It was called The Inheritance. In 1861, the Civil War broke out. Alcott worked as a volunteer, sewing uniforms and bandages for soldiers. The following year, she enlisted as an Army nurse. She spent the war years in Washington, nursing wounded soldiers at a military hospital. While working at the hospital, she wrote many letters to her family at home in Massachusetts. After the war, she turned the letters into a book, which was published under the title Hospital Sketches. She also wrote numerous romantic stories, which she sold to magazines. Around this same time, she was offered the opportunity to travel to Europe as the companion to an invalid. When she returned home from Europe in 1866, she found her family still in financial difficulty and in need of money, so she went back to writing. Her big break came in 1868, with the publication of her first novel for girls, Little Women. The novel achieved instant success, and the public wanted more. From then on, Alcott supported herself and her family by writing novels for girls. It wasn't the writing she had dreamed of doing, but it earned her a good income. Alcott took care of her family for the rest of her life. In 1878, her youngest sister May got married. A year later, May died after giving birth. Louisa Alcott raised her sister's orphaned child. In 1882, Bronson Alcott suffered a stroke. Soon after that, Louisa Alcott set up a house for him, her niece, her sister Anna, and Anna's 2 sons in Boston. Her mother was no longer living by this time. Alcott was still writing novels for girls, including 2 sequels to Little Women, Little Men and Joe's Boys. The latter was published in 1886. Louisa Alcott had suffered poor health ever since she contracted typhoid fever while working as a war nurse. She died in March of 1888, at the age of 55. She was buried in Concord, Massachusetts.
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 4.